Good morning. Well, actually, it's good afternoon. It's about 3 o'clock, April 13th, 2020 for our people. Getting off to a little bit of a later start. I know that's going around the COVID community, right? Since we don't have that morning deadline, folks are making up their own schedules. So it's about 3 o'clock. I'm proud that we're still keeping it Monday. We're not at the store, Hakim's Bookstore, 210 South 52nd Street, in between Walnut and Chancellor. And best believe, when this is done, we will be back there. I know there's a lot of questions about small businesses and which ones may be able to survive this pandemic, but I'm here to tell you, Hakim's Bookstore will be back 210 South 52nd Street between Walnut and Chancellor whenever the doors open up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, West Blackadelphia. In the meantime, again, we're on line. You're watching this hopefully on Hakim's Bookstore at Facebook, Hakim's Bookstore on Instagram, HakimsBookstore.com, and also my own personal YouTube channel is Afrolantican Jurisprudence. We're going to have an Afrolantica too. That's all part of my new works and books that are coming out this year. But Afrolantican Jurisprudence is also where you can catch this video. And so we're going to try to, again, during this pandemic, we're probably not going to go the whole hour as we usually do in the store. One of the reasons, because I don't have my man, the producer, super producer Chris Arnold, flexing the beats behind me, getting me grooving instead of talking. And also, again, we don't have those books that are in the store currently, right? One of the things we want to do is present to you the new books that are being featured in the store. And since we don't have that, that's going to cut down our time. But the overarching theme, the main reason we're doing this is to honor folks like Lister Velt Middleton. Remember him in his show For the People on PBS stations, and he brought John Henrik Clark and Ivan Van Sertima and all those folks into Francis Cress Welsing into your living room when you could not see those folks pretty much anywhere else. And so that's what we're trying to do here, is bring the scholarship, the books, the intelligence that I've encountered in academia and bring them to the people. I am your host, Andre L. Smith, Smitty Bonton, Dre Smith, and whatnot. You can call me a lot of different things. Former law professor, taught at Florida International University, Penn State, Howard, and the Widener Law School, or Delaware Law School at Widener. And it's interesting, I think one of the books that I want to present to you today, there's a couple books on law and justice that are coming out in the near future that are very close to what I think is attacking the central problem of white supremacy, and that is the racial wealth gap. I've been a little frustrated over the years that a lot of scholars and my colleagues have danced around the subject, but I think that it is now starting to get the currency it deserves, and particularly because of this pandemic, right? The racial wealth gap is center to the reason why black folks are disproportionately affected by this virus. And I'm going to talk about that shortly, because this theme, we've talked about black business building during this time and using this period to plot the next move, so to speak. But we're going to take a little time to try to inspire you, not scare you, but inspire you by describing how the racial wealth gap is putting black folks by and large at risk with this COVID virus, so that you can be inspired after it's over to take a new approach, so that we as a people can commit to greater entrepreneurship, capital accumulation. And when I say capital accumulation, I do not mean just financial. One of the great things about entrepreneurship, one of the great things about creating nonprofits, right? I'm including that too, including nonprofit institutions, is not just the financial reward, but it is the human capital, the know-how and the knowledge that you gain when you do those things, and also the social capital that is created and enhanced by folks in our community building together. So black businesses are not just about one individual making a lot of money. that is hopefully the case, and hopefully that person deploys it usefully in the political arena. However, when we talk about capital, I always mean it in the broadest sense, that human capital, what you know how to do, what you know in your brain, is extremely valuable, and so is social capital, who you know, your networks, right? And so your networks have very intelligent and forthright and skillful people in it. After this pandemic is over, we'll be all right, right? We'll be able to create, we'll be able to build, we'll be able to hire, right, our own people, and then hopefully pay them more than minimum wage or what have you. But it all starts with a plan, right? So let's use this time to start at least thinking of that master plan. It ain't nothing but sweat inside your head. All right. Before we get back into that, let me give some shout outs. Again, let me give a shout out to, again, Princess Yvonne, Princess Glenda. They are the owners of Hakim's Bookstore, founded by Dawood Hakim back in 1959, 61 years in the game. Second oldest black bookstore in the country, oldest black bookstore on the East Coast, oldest black bookstore in Philadelphia, right? Home of black books. Shout out to, again, Chris Arnold. Shout out to the brother Tafari, who's also helping Hakim's produce a bi-monthly newsletter. So look out for that stuff. One of the things we want to include in that, and especially using this time during this pandemic, to start investigating and amassing homeschool curriculum. Some of you are stressing out about teaching your kids. I'm going to let you know. Some of you are going to do so well, you should keep doing it, right? The attention that you are able to give personally to your child may be something that you want to hold on to. And if you raise your child up right, they're going to take care of you when you're older. So even if it is something of a financial sacrifice, it's something that a lot of us may consider. And so shout out to Tafari and all of them. And for those of us that we're going to try to corral and gather resources relating to homeschool, Afrocentric homeschooling, and present them on this show and others, and have them in the bookstore for our homeschool, to support our homeschool parents. I also know homeschool parents need venues, because it's not just one parent and one child, that a lot of homeschool parents collectively want to work together, right, and have limited resources, and can't always have it at one person's house, right? So one way or another, we're gonna figure out a way to create venues, curriculum, and support services for Afrocentric homeschool parents. Shout out to everybody that's doing that right now. Shout out to shout out to all the Instagram DJs. An old man like me is now firmly an Instagram patron because of the awesome DJ sets that have been jumping off in this pandemic. Let me tell you, Saturday, the immortal West Philadelphia's own, your favorite DJ's favorite DJ, Jazzy Jeff, has recovered from the coronavirus. He said it himself. It's not a rumor. He did in fact confirm that he had the coronavirus. He says the worst thing ever. Shout out to his wife for taking care of him, and he is now back in effect, and had a session on 3 o'clock. And let me tell you, again, that's your favorite DJ's favorite DJ. I don't care if it was D Nice, Questlove, Kid Capri, they were all in the Jazzy Jeff room listening to Philadelphia's finest. After that, I jumped into Lord Finesse's room for a couple hours. And then, where's my hip-hop heads? Because I know you were in the RZA versus DJ Premier set later on at 9 o'clock set. Awesome. I'm not going to tell you who I thought won, because hip-hop won. Right? Hip-hop won that night. Even with RZA's Tin Pan Sound. For all my Caribbeans and dancehall fans, I've always heard of a Tin Pan Sound, and now I really understand what that meant when RZA could not get his sound together. So for that alone, you could give it to Premier. But as far as track for track, my goodness, that was awesome. Saturday was definitely the worst of times, and it was the best of times. My knees are still hurting. Still a little sore. Shout out to DJ Envy, who had a marathon on Sunday. And the reason I want to shout that out is because, again, this collective economics, the whole point of his marathon DJ session on Sunday was for folks to donate to pay DJs that are out of work right now. Right? And shout out to everybody that's come up with some type of program that entertains the people and yet also spreads the wealth around during these trying times, because this ain't going to be just a couple months. Even when they let us out, right? Let us out. We all in jail. Yeah, we are. But even when we're let outside, even when we get our liberty back, the economy is going to suffer for a while, right? And so banding together, sharing, supporting each other, going through a collective economic period is going to be so crucial in all of the black communities, because again, that racial wealth gap means that we are going to bear the brunt of this, right? Know that, but at the same time, don't be scared of it, prepare for it, right? Know where your help comes from. Shout out to, Paul Robeson. April 9th was Paul Robeson's birthday. So shout out to the Paul Robeson House over on 49th and Walnut, a sister institution. And once again, God willing, when this is over, we're going to the Robeson House. Hakim's will be back in effect, ACAF, CEC. We're going to make this a West Philly stroll. The black-owned restaurants in West Philly. Veganish, Booker's, Adiola's, 48th Street Grills, Brown Sugar Bakery, and whatnot. We need to have cultural events that feed our brain nightly in West Philly, and do that West Philly stroll over to a black-owned restaurant, eat up all their food, build up that community, build up those social contacts, human capital, social capital, financial and political. Speaking of shout out to, again, my dear friend, the Reverend Marshall Mitchell of Salem Baptist Church. I've shouted him out before about Salem Baptist Church's commitment to creating a green book, or a book of black businesses that either attend or are associated with his church, so we can increase the volatility in our collective economic status. I believe today, right now, I believe he's doing an IG live with the Attorney General of Pennsylvania about the racial wealth gap and the COVID virus. Let me say this, I hope Marshall Mitchell, his cousin, the Representative Chris Rabb, and other politicians, while we're during this time, I would really like to see all of the councilmen, all of the state representatives. I would really like to see y'all do IG live episodes that explain to your constituents the stimulus packages that are going around now. We're talking about $2-3 trillion that is being created out of thin air. I'm not going to go into a debate about the Federal Reserve and made up fiat money and Bitcoin and all that. We could do that. As a matter of fact, we will at a later time. But right now, what we need to understand is those subsidies and that stimulus is out there, and it is upon us now to jump on getting our share. And I lament the idea that our Democratic politicians are not promoting the stimulus and helping the people get their share out of fear that it's going to help Donald Trump in November. Got to help your people first, and they will remember you and support you for that. Right? Playing games when the folks are hurting, and remember that too. All right. And again, this racial wealth gap, we have to pay particular attention. Let me give you some numbers that I read this week. In Mississippi, the poorest state in the country, and then again, the place where black people are the poorest, right? 56% of the Mississippians with the COVID virus are African American, or black folks. 56%. Now, Mississippi is a predominantly black state. I'm not sure if it's 56% of the population, but that's not as far out of tune. But here's the number that we don't care for, is that of those 56% of cases being black folks, 72% of all COVID deaths in Mississippi with respect our black folks, right? So we're talking about the racial wealth gap in a lot of different ways. We can talk about healthcare disparities. We can talk about access to hospitals. But what we really need to be talking about is the fact that the racial wealth gap forces black people, by and large, to accept whatever job is available to us, regardless of the paltry wages, the oppressive terms, the wretched conditions, because if we don't, states have criminalized poverty such that if you go to jail, then your labor is just going to be sold by the state, because the 13th Amendment allows involuntary servitude with respect to the duly convicted. So having this underclass, having this permanent underclass that does the dirty work, that doesn't have space to self-isolate, that can't quarantine, that has to be on the front lines and the most dangerous lines, is a feature of the racial wealth gap, and why it is important for white folks to maintain and for black folks to combat. It is almost no different than a war when the black soldiers are sent into the front lines first, right? It's really not much different. Black folks have to be on public transportation because of the combination of the racial wealth gap, not being able to afford your own transportation, and also being mandated to go to work and be on the buses. And I can't lie. Healthcare aides that have to use transportation, that then have to service elderly customers and what have you. I mean, this is scary, scary, scary stuff. And the central aspect of it is the racial wealth gap. We can talk about disparities in diabetes. We can talk about health disparities, sugar, tobacco, and all that. First of all, we know that black folks are not more pathological than anybody else. Secondly, to the extent there are differences when it comes to usage, I guarantee you it tracks the racial wealth gap. Poor people eat poorly. Right? You can't afford all the good stuff or whatever. You know, in the hood, a 40-ounce of beer is cheaper than a bottle of water. It's ridiculous. Then you got the food deserts, the hiked up prices because of insurance. We can go on and on and on and on, but it all draws back to the racial wealth gap. Right? It all comes back to that. So we need, in this from 2020 forward, to put that at the height of our black agenda, so to speak. And forgive me if I believe reparations are absolutely justified and also absolutely not coming. Right? We've seen $2 trillion of stimulus created out of thin air, right? Printed money by the Fed, getting to this point of so-called quantitative easing. And again, we can talk about that in further detail, but know that that money was somehow, that couldn't be, they said it couldn't be used for reparations. They didn't have it or whatnot. There is no will to pay reparations. The case is just. We know the case is just, right? But do they have the political will to do it? We can't even get them to have the political will to have Medicare for all. We can't even get them to have the political will to eliminate student loan debt. So the idea that we're going to push past all of that and get reparations, they are due, but they're not coming. And therefore, black folks are going to have to accumulate capital ourselves from 2020 forward, because this pandemic is showing you how deadly the racial wealth gap can be. Woo, let me take a pause on that. Well, let me not. Let me just keep rolling with it, because I got a stat from a law professor who's been recently in the game. She's not just been recently in the game. She started teaching at Fordham in 2017, but she's been around and in the game, adjuncting at Georgetown. She's worked for Hillary Clinton. She's been the Council of Foreign Relations. She's been in deep into the Washington politics. Well, now she's a law professor at Fordham, Catherine Powell. And she wrote a very influential and very good article on CNN.com called COVID-19 People of Color Labor Market Disparities, right? So if you have a chance to check that out, just index or search for Catherine Powell in her CNN article. And this is just a quick blurb out of it. While 37% of Asian workers and 29.9% of white workers are able to work remotely, only 19.7% of black workers and 16% of Latina workers are able to telework, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. In short, they must leave their homes and show up for work during a pandemic. The duality, people of color being overrepresented among the unemployed and among the essential workers. So we're the ones that are getting laid off on the one hand, but if you want to keep your job, then you're going to have to be on the front lines of this pandemic, risking your life as a bus driver, as a nurse, as an aide, as a supermarket worker, etc., etc. Right? So shout out to Catherine Powell for a fantastic article talking about the economic consequences of the COVID-19 virus. I want to shout her out on top of another fantastic woman scholar in law schools, Bernadette Atuahene. Professor Atuahene is at the Illinois Institute of Chicago. The law school is called Chicago-Kent Law School. It's a very high-ranked law school, and she wrote a paper or a law review article called Predatory Cities. Predatory Cities, and she has talked about how cities like Philadelphia, like Chicago, like all those around the country, we talk Ferguson, Missouri to Washington, D.C., are have a central role in exacerbating the racial wealth gap by levying informal and formal taxes on black folks while they reduce taxes on the gentrifying white folks that are coming in the city. Opportunity zones for them, tax credits for them, tax rebates for them, but sin taxes, soda taxes, criminal justice law, fines, fees, and forfeitures for us. And she talks specifically, Bernadette Atuahene is dealing specifically with taxes on property taxes, that while wealthy folks are getting tax rebates, black folks in cities are being arbitrarily taxed too high on their property. Her paper explains it. So there's just so many ways. The neoconservative plan to starve the beast is reducing taxes for the wealthy and white, yet increasing taxes for the poor, black and brown. Right? And exacerbating the racial wealth gap precisely for what's going on now, that when there's a pandemic, when there's a war, when there is some type of strife, black folks are the ones that have to be on the front lines more than any other people. So, with that set up, I guess we're going to talk about some of the books that came out. Just recall, we this is to, again, I said all that to inspire you, not to scare you, not to anger you, right? Because we're already angry enough, we're already mad enough, or we're pissed. What we have to do is be strategic, and in order to be strategic, we have to absolutely know what's going on in the field. And so I'm telling you what's going on in the tax and how we're creating, how this racial wealth gap is being created, how we address it. On the one hand, again, coming up with this time to have a plan for you to create your own business or your own nonprofit, right? I predict that when this is over, we are going to be in a depression, not a recession, but a depression. And the government, again, with the stimulus checks, these loans, they're going to have to support and subsidize those people who are going to create these businesses and nonprofit institutions. So if you have an idea, if there's things that you always wanted to do, this is a time to put pen to paper. If while you're homeschooling your kids, if you're developing this better method and you want to share it with other people, let's jot this down and create it. Involve your children in the planning. That's academics. That's education. Helping them to build a business along with you. All right? So, a business plan is so important. Lawyers out there, I'm hearing about law students that are graduating this year that won't be able to take a bar exam, but yet they get to practice. Well, it's going to be hard for you to find a job outside of the top law firms. And I implore you, I implore my black law students that are going to graduate in the next month or so, take that knowledge you learned from basic federal income tax and help black people save money on their taxes by turning their hustles into hobbies. The money you save them is more than what you will be able to charge them in fees. You can save them a couple $1,000s in over the years and charge them only a couple hundred. You live, they live, the community increases, employment and all that. We have to increase that human, social, financial, and political capital. So for my black lawyers that may find themselves looking for new opportunities when this subsides, helping black folks that are working turn their hobbies into hustles has to be a major component of our strategy to close the racial wealth gap. Yes, fight for reparations. Yes, fight for student loan forgiveness, because we're disproportionately burdened by student loan forgiveness. Do not give up the political arena, of course. However, the political arena is tethered to the financial arena. Right? Citizens United by the Supreme Court said basically, if you ain't got no money, you ain't saying nothing. Money and politics are intertwined. Right? So when we talk about black entrepreneurship, we're not disrespecting political engagement. We're trying to do political engagement even better. Right? Because he who pays the piper names the tune. All right. So now that I done speechified you, what was our original purpose for doing For Our People? To bring that scholarship, bring black books and all that stuff to the people. So number one, we talked about Catherine Powell. I hope she is very soon to produce a book about economic justice. I know from her work, I briefly looked up her work, and she's been published. She's only been teaching for 3 or 4 years at Fordham, but she's been publishing for the last 20 years in some of the top journals and what have you. So she has a lot of work on black feminism and women's success. Bernadette Atuahene, her work on predatory cities, I have got to see that in the book. I mean, between her and Beth Colgan, I mean, that's the hottest stuff in the game. And of course, because I agree with it and it supports my book, Taxes, Death, and Trouble. I am going to have to redo Taxes, Death, and Trouble to include Beth Colgan's work, to include Bernadette Atuahene's work. So if you've ever wondered why certain books have more than one edition, the second edition of my book is outdated. I just wrote it in 2018, and without their work, without Atuahene's work, without Colgan's work, it is going to become obsolete very shortly. So after I finish Afro-Atlantic Jurisprudence, I'm going to have to pick up Taxes, Death, and Trouble and include the more recent scholarship. So shout out to those scholars. Let's move on to the books that have been recent that I've come across with. The Journal of Blacks in Higher Education. Shout out to you all. Before I get to their books, I also came across a book that just came out this past week, African American Political Thought, a collected history edited by the philosopher Melvin L. Rogers and Jack Turner. Let me read a little blurb from it, because this is for those that, for the really, really, really deep thinkers out there. My street philosophers love you, and here's where you can find books that talk about the philosophers prior to you. They didn't have, just like you, they did not necessarily have the title philosopher. However, the deepness of their thought cannot be denied. Melvin Rogers and Jack Turner have brought together leading scholars to reflect on individual intellectuals from the past 4 centuries, developing their list with an expansive approach to political expression. The collected essays consider such figures as Martin Delany, one of my favorites, the so-called father of black nationalism, Ida B. Wells, W.E.B. Du Bois, James Baldwin, Toni Morrison, and Audre Lorde, whose works are addressed by scholars such as Farah Jasmine Griffin, Robert Gooding Williams, Michael Dawson, and others. While African American political thought is inextricable from the historical movement of American political thought, this volume stresses the individuality of black thinkers, the transnational and diasporic consciousness, and how individual speakers and writers draw on various traditions simultaneously to broaden our conception of African American political ideas. That's fantastic stuff. Let me just real quick note about that. African American is my, I guess, ancestral identity, which is fantastic, but I'm black, right? And so I appreciate why folks are being specific about African American or people of color or whatever the case may be. Strategically, I'm black, and I appreciate us being black instead of being divided. All right, just a small note on that. And I say that because I don't like for the philosophers that are being discussed to be really divided, right? Du Bois versus Garvey versus Booker T versus A. Philip Randolph, when by the time they all passed, they were more in common than they were apart. When W.E.B. Du Bois retires in Ghana, he starts to write about Pan-Africanism almost like he is Marcus Garvey. And what did I just say? Just like Marcus Garvey. He moved, W.E.B. Du Bois emigrated from the United States to Ghana, where he was laid to rest. All right, the Journal of Blacks in Higher Education, they have their new book list out, a good 6 interesting books that have recently been published by authors. I don't think all of the authors are not necessarily black, but they are of interest to black scholars. So the first one is Bad Men, Creative Touchstones of Black Writers by Howard Ramsby of University of Virginia Press. I'm very interested in this book because I'm a hip-hop fan. I'm also a reggae fan. So the bad man, right? That's a big thing. That's a good thing, right? In certain cultures when it comes to hip-hop reggae. But at the same time, black male misogyny and all these other terms are coming out. So hyper-masculinity, bad, versus the good bad man, right? The one who is hardcore about righteousness, right? And how it leads, Sizzler Kalanji, Anthony B., right? Public Enemy, right? So the Bad Men, Creative Touchstones on Black Writers is a very interesting book. And I'm interested in the directions it goes. I have my conception of what it means to be a bad man in black culture, but I'm really interested in what Howard Ramsby is going to touch upon. I'm sure he's going to go back to Native Son, Richard Wright, and Bigger Thomas, and all that other stuff. But what about Okonkwo? Things fall apart. That was a bad man, right? Anyway, similarly, Black Cultural Mythology by Christel and Temple, who is also talking about fiction writers and the myths and the cultures that we create through fiction, where the books that they write become almost as real or even more real than the actual history books that are given to us. We know that the history books that we use have this Eurocentric spin on it, or even a Americentric spin or a white spin on it. And so our literary history, the Toni Morrisons discussing 19th century Ohio, the Charles Johnsons in Middle Passage describing the Middle Passage, right? These things become more or at least competitive historical accounts to what we get from academia because of the Afrocentric nature of those writers, whether they're trying to be that or not. Great book, Black Cultural Mythology by Christel and Temple. Bodily Evidence, Racism, Slavery, and Maternal Power in the novels of Toni Morrison. So we didn't talk about Toni Morrison, all 3 books so far, right? Toni Morrison talks about that bad man in several different books, in several different contexts, right? Black Cultural Mythology also. And so Toni Morrison, I'm a big fan of Toni Morrison. I know that's a lot of people's very favorite writer. Octavia Butler is my #1 favorite writer. But Toni Morrison is bad too. Because you learn, one of the things about Toni Morrison is her books are a lot like, what's the white dude? James Michener, where the first couple chapters are going to teach you about 18th century Ohio. They're going to teach you about 1920s North Florida and black people's lives in those eras. And so you learn as much as you are entertained. Now, I will say this, and I hope I don't spoil it, but one of the reasons I like Octavia Butler is my #1 is because when she develops new series, they go in different directions, so far afield from her other books. Fledgling is so much different than the parables. Parables are so much different than Imago and Adulthood Rights. That Adulthood Rights is so much different than Pattern Master. Pattern Master series is so much different than Kindred. Woo! And I love Toni Morrison, but there's a common theme in her books. You want me to give it to you? I don't think it's going to spoil the books. But Toni Morrison, when she writes a book and I pick it up, I know something, someone, or even somewhere is going to get loved to death. Get down, Toni Morrison. Get down. All right. Put Your Hands on Your Hips and Act Like a Woman. Black History and Poetics and Performance by Gale P. Jackson. And again, talking about culture and novels, fiction, but also theater, I believe, when it talks about this development of black womanhood outside of just traditional familial roles, church, education, public education, right? What are our books? What are our entertainment? What do movies and all that talking about black womanhood? And I want to say Gale P. Jackson is coming from it from a position of strength and not black women without agency being just kind of led astray. All right. And similar to that, Sensuous Knowledge, a black feminist approach for everyone by Minna Salami. That title is attractive, especially just like we're trying to bring academia to the people. Minna Salami is first of all, she's a Nigerian black feminist. So her perspective may be a little different than ours in the United States of America. I need to find that out. Right? So if there's just one reason to pick up her book, is black feminism in Africa, in West Africa, in Nigeria, does it have the same content? Are there the same concerns? What are the distinctions? What are the differences? All right. So Minna Salami and a black feminist approach for everyone to action, to make it actionable, right? Instead of just a theory. Right? How do we make it actionable in our daily lives? That's what I try to do when I keep saying that we talk about the racial wealth gap as an academic concern, white supremacy as an academic concern. But what does it mean for black people specifically? It means that each individual black person should better educate ourselves and our children, start and patronize black businesses, and then stop unduly criticizing each other. You do those three things, you are black enough. Right? The Response of Weeds, a misplacement of black poetry on the prairies by Bertrand Bickersteth. And I want to use that to just give a shout out to the brother Major Jackson, a Philadelphia native, who is, I believe, Vermont's poet laureate. Shout out to Sonia Sanchez. Shout out to all the poets out there. There is rap is rhythm and poetry, and yet we know there's still a distinction, right? And so shout out for Major Jackson, who is a poet, right? Who also is down with King Britt. He's down with Questlove. He's down with the Roots crew. I mean, the talent that Philadelphia has produced in the 90s and 2000 through that squad, the talent that we produced back in the 70s with the Gamble and Huff era, what we produced back in the 40s and 50s is ongoing, it's continuing, and it's broad, right? It's broad, right? So whether it's hip-hop, the greatest DJ on the planet, Jazzy Jeff, versus Questlove, versus all types of hip-hop heads, versus singers, artists, and even the poets like Major Jackson. We need to support our Philadelphia artists, and wherever you're at. If you're in Chicago, support those artists. If you're in LA, Atlanta, Miami, support those folks, especially now, right? Because that was for some of them, that's all they do. Right? And to not be able to perform, to not be able to recite, right? Let's support folks when they come up with these new creative ways to present their stuff on Instagram, on Facebook. I am just now becoming aware of Twitch. I don't know. I'm gonna have to get down with it if that's the way I'm going to support a lot of folks. All right. So we've kind of blazed through this. And I appreciate everybody bearing with us as far as the time. We're going to try again next Monday to make sure that we set this off a little closer to 11 a.m. because it's going to take me a little bit to upload this and then also get it to Hakim's Facebook account. So shout out to Ms. Woody, shout out to Nefertiti Moore, shout out to everybody that typically joins us week to week and that's hanging out with us. And we're going to see you again very soon at Hakim's Bookstore. 210 South 52nd Street in between Chancellor and Walnut. Home of Black Books, 59 years. 60 years since 1959, Dawood Hakim. Check us out at HakimsBookstore.com. Hakim's Bookstore on Facebook. Hakim's Bookstore on Instagram. Right? Till then, you know what I say, just what I said. Better educate ourselves and our children. Start and patronize black businesses and institutions. Stop unduly criticizing each other. Right? Amass human, political, social, financial capital. That is the revolution that will never be televised. Hotep, see you next week.